NMHOA. We've got Carla Burr, who's first vice president, and Myra Close, who is our treasurer. And earlier this year in May, actually, we each received a scholarship to attend a training seminar put on by NeighborWorks America, who's one of our funders. And it was a 2-day training, and we've got a hope booklet that we're trying to condense down into our presentation here. We hope that a lot of the material will be valuable for you. We understand that you represent a number of different situations, whether it's an individual community HOA or a state homeowner association and advocacy group. You may or may not have an executive director. A lot of the focus at this training session in Kansas City is where it was held. Dealt with nonprofits that had executive directors and the relationship between an executive director and the board members. But we'll focus more on that would apply to nonprofits that don't have executive directors. We'll touch on it a little bit, but we'll get into a variety of topics. Are you able to forward it, the slides, or?
Yeah, we can actually forward the whole program.
No, but you can't.
He's got it there.
Okay.
Yeah, he's got it on the computer there.
Okay. So
would you like the next
advance?
Do you like the next slide?
Yes, please. Okay. So these are the presentation topics. The general topics are in the program book. What we're going to be covering. Hopefully, get to all of it. And after each topic, we will try to allow a few minutes for a question on that given topic, and then at the end, providing there's time, we hope to address some of the challenges that your groups are facing, and discussions or question and answers at the end. Okay, next slide. Okay, and already gave the introduction as far as what we're going to cover. Roles and responsibilities and a whole host of things, getting into the financial responsibilities and fiduciary duties and all. So let's go to the next slide. Okay, and this is Myra's.
So now, board development is what we're on, right?
Yep.
Yes.
Is that where we're at with this? Okay,
Yep.
I can't see that, so sorry about that.
Just so you know.
So, the board member cycle.
Oh, do you?
I have it in here, so you'll
All
have to go on
right, I
the
didn't know that was on there.
Okay, you might need mine.
I heard your whistle.
Yes.
It works, yeah.
Okay. Can you hear me? Is it
Pretty-
on?
Hold it pretty close to your.
Okay, better?
That's
Yeah.
right. Commercial.
Okay, since we have
Go to the
this,
slide.
since we have this board building cycle on here, let's kind of go through that. Of course, we need to identify the board's needs. So when you're choosing your board, you need to know the people that you would like to have on your board, what their skills, what their connections are. Identify sources of board members with the needed characteristics. And then cultivate, get to know them, find out if they're interested in your organization. Then recruit. Describe the expectations, responsibilities of the board members, and don't minimize the requirements. Invite questions and elicit their interest and preparedness to serve. I think that there's, in this case here, a lot of times we're kind of afraid of that we'll scare them off. But I guarantee you that if you don't let them know up front that this is not a 2-minute-a-day job, that this is going to be a full-time job with overtime, with no pay, that they'll become discouraged very quickly. Then when you do bring on a new board member, be sure that you orientate them to your particular board and what you see as what your board is trying to accomplish. You want to make sure that you've got bylaws, finances, organization charts. You need to give them the recent minutes. Give them the board members' responsibilities, and list of the board members and key staff members, so that your board can talk to one another and has some idea of what has been happening before they came on, as far as the board minutes go. Be sure that you activate, be sure that you keep everybody involved. You're going to have some that are going to be very shy. In our case, we are on the phone once a month. And so there are some of us that talk a lot. Myself and this lady here is two, to name a couple. And then there's others that very seldom say anything. And that's this guy here in the middle. So sometimes you have to encourage them and say, Ann, what do you think? Or Gary, what do you think? Or Ed, what is, or Rita, or I'm just naming, I'm not saying that they're putting any kind of a bad connotation on them, but sometimes you have to ask. So what do you think about this? In order to get them to speak up. And once they get used to the board, then they will feel more comfortable speaking up. And in your case, you're all going to be in the same room together. So I think this process here will be a lot shorter time than it is when you join our board. You need to educate your board as to what you're facing. You need to rotate your board members, term limits. You need to evaluate your individual board members. And you need to celebrate, recognizing your accomplishments. Sometimes we get so involved in what we didn't accomplish, we don't look at what we did accomplish as a board. And always make room for humor and a good laugh. That always helps. Let's go on to the next topic here now. Sorry about that. Get this to slide in there. Benefiting from diversity. When I was I am on a state board now. I'm also on our state board, but before I joined NMHOA, I realized almost immediately that we did not have any members of our board that spoke another language. And in Utah, we have Hispanic, Latino, Chinese. And so be sure that if you can, diversify your board and get board members in there of other cultures so that you can learn from them and they can learn from you, and they're reluctant to come on board. We had a very difficult time getting the other cultures to come on board. The whole board is going to benefit from diversity. They're going to learn about other cultures and be able to take it back to their people, for lack of a better way to say it, and so that the other cultures within your communities will join in. Your individual board members' responsibilities, you need to let them know that they need to attend all the meetings. And in your bylaws or in your operating procedures, if they miss so many meetings, in our bylaws, that if we miss 3 meetings a year of the board calls, not the committee calls, that what we've done is we've automatically given our resignation. So we're saying that you have to be there 9 meetings out our board meeting every year. If you have, the other 3 are excused, of course, that doesn't count then towards your 3. It's only that when you don't call and say that you're going to, or call afterwards. We had one man that his son was involved in a car accident. I guarantee you he wasn't thinking about that meeting that we're having that afternoon. But he called us a couple of days later and told us why he wasn't able to come to be on the board call. And of course that was excused after the fact. Always review your agenda and your supporting materials prior to the board and committee meetings. So when you receive your minutes, as we do, through the email, read them. If you receive your treasurer's report through the email before your meetings, read them. So that you are prepared for that meeting, whatever it be, committee or a board meeting or an executive committee meeting. Serve on committees and offer to take on special assignments. The word there, offer. Don't wait to be asked. And step up to the plate. And I'm sure most of us in this room do this, but when we go back to our states and to our individual HOAs, that could be where we have a problem of getting our residents within our communities to volunteer their time. Make a personal contribution to your HOA, to your state, and to your national. Even if it hurts. Because this is your home you're talking about. And I realize that you have a dues usually of so much for your individual HOAs, for your community HOAs, and for your state, and for your national. But give above and beyond that. And if you just set $1 a week aside, that's $52 a week that you could set, a year, I beg your pardon, that you could split between the 3 organizations over and above your dues. Okay? For everything?
For this section.
Okay, all right. Motivation. I had one person in my community that didn't feel that she could do it. She wasn't able to leave the house very easily. She couldn't come to the meetings, but she wanted to be involved. So I said, well, there are envelopes that need to be stuffed before the meetings for people that we're giving out handouts. There's correlation to be done, things to be stapled together. She said, bring them to me. So she loved that type of work because it kept her busy and it also kept her informed because she was able to read all of the information that we were going to pass out in our meetings, even though she wasn't able to come to the meetings. So if someone asks you, as she did me, find a way to involve them. And I talked a little bit earlier about a passive board member. If you have a board member that's just sitting there and not doing anything or just keeping quiet and just listening, find a way to involve them so that they will speak up and become comfortable when you're having a meeting. Okay. Term limits. Set your term limits. Do you have, who does not have term limits in their organization? Does everybody have you don't have term limits in your organization?
We couldn't get people to. Trying to get a board
So you don't have, Connie, you don't have term limits in your, so I thought you were just in office for 2 years.
But it doesn't say how long you can run. I mean, how many times.
Oh, okay,
Right. And
All
that's
right.
what term limits would be.
okay. So okay. To me, it was, when I was reading this, it was that you didn't set any term limits at all. You just, they were just elected and then they did not have to be re-elected every couple of years or every 3 years. So, okay. Go ahead. All right.
It's still morning, yes?
Yeah.
Whereas, yeah, it's still morning. My body clock says it's afternoon. Anyway, I want to talk about the structures. Obviously we've got board committees, and there's all kinds of different ways to serve. But what I want to talk about specifically are committees. How many of you have committees in addition to board members? Okay. For those of you who don't, and even if you do, this may be helpful to you. I thought this was an excellent way to get help for the board and for staff if you have it, to bring, assistance in doing research or whatever. The board committees exist to assist the board in carrying out its work by researching issues, developing well-considered proposals for the board to act on, carrying out specific duties on behalf of the board. All committees should have a written charge approved by the board to guide their work. Committee reports to the board should clearly indicate the purpose of the report. The other thing is, the one thing I'd like to notice was that when you're responding, most of the boards have a committee chair. And a committee chair is sort of like the president of the board or the chair of the board. It's just in a lesser position. But basically, they're doing similar work. They're scheduling meetings, getting an agenda together, getting all that. They're doing similar work, just they don't have the fiduciary responsibilities that the board has. Providing feedback to the board, raising questions about material in the report, and asking for the board to respond back in an appropriate time frame. The good thing is, if you are in the committee and you are discussing this issue and you're not getting progress on the issue, don't bring it to the board because they're ready to act on whatever you give them. If you're not set and you still have questions, you need to approach the chair of the board and say, look, we're still unresolved on this and we need to get a decision.
Your mic isn't working.
Pardon me?
Your mic is not working.
It's not working at all.
No.
1, 2.
No.
And I'm not,
We can hear you fine without.
okay, you can hear me without it? Good.
Can you hear it back there?
Yeah.
Just save it for.
Yeah, because I have a big mouth. I'm just saying. But the interesting thing is, if a committee is acting like the board in some respects because they're actually going through whatever your charge is. If it's researching whatever the topic is, I can't even think of a good one right now, but whatever the topic is, you have to be settled in what your recommendation will be to the board in order to enact the changes that you're recommending. So whatever your recommendation is, you all need to be solid on it before you come to the board, because the board's ready to act on whatever you're giving them. And I can guarantee you, if you're not prepared, the board will send it back to you for further discussion because they can't spend the time going through and reliving everything you've been doing. The whole point is for you to do the work and they can enact whatever you come up with if they're in agreement. So one of the things I wanted to just talk about was reminders. Committees versus task force. A task force is something that is not a part of a committee. It's not under a charge of a committee. And a task force has a time limit or a date certain limit. Once the task is completed, that task force goes away. There's no need for those people to stay. Now, if you want to add a committee to it, that's your prerogative. But what I would suggest is everything that requires board approval, once you get your committee all settled and you approach the board, you get approval, it's enacted, you move on. Your next charge may be for something else. If the task force people are working and they're in sync with what you have, they have the skills you need, you can invite them in. Now, one question people ask all the time is, can non-board members be on a committee? Yes, absolutely. If you don't have that, the board's doing double duty. And it could take forever to get through committee stuff plus board stuff. And anyway, okay.
I know how I felt.
Yeah. Basically, members need to see how the work of that group has had an impact on the board. It will encourage them to continue in a committee or a task force. Then to see what is happening and how it's affecting the board, that's a great thing. It encourages the board, it encourages the committee, and anybody on the task force. I put into this tips for successful committees. There's 12 different items, and they will be included in this so you can read them on your own. I just want to go real quickly, the role of committee chair and the role of committee members. The committee chair obviously sets the tone for the committee work. They ensure the members have the information they need, and they oversee logistics, committee meetings and all that. They report to the full board any policy recommendations or changes. They work closely with the chief executive or staff if you have it. They assign work to the committee members, and they set meeting agendas, run meetings, just like I said. Then they initiate and lead the committee's annual evaluation in process, which committee members review their accomplishments and in relation to the committee goals and reflect on areas where the committee's work needs improvement. Committee members, if you notice that there are people helping you that have skill sets that you feel you can use, I would invite them to be on a committee. If you have a committee and you know that they have skills that are valuable to you, invite them to be on a committee. It will not only, if they're willing to serve, it'll help them use their skills, and it'll help the board gain skills that they may not have. But committee members must make a serious commitment to participate, and they have to participate actively in the committee's work, including substantive participation in committee meetings and discussions. They should volunteer for and willingly accept assignments. They must stay informed about the committee matters and prepare themselves well for meetings. They should get to know other committee members and build a collegial working relationship that contributes to the consensus. They should also be active participants in the committee's annual evaluation. I'm not going to go much further with that, but I thought this was very helpful. I know as a board we have several committees, but at present we don't have outside people, and that's something we want to do, is bring in people who have skills that we need and get them to participate in the committee. It'll help us as an organization, it'll help you as members, and thanks.
Okay, thanks, Carla. Our next section is board roles and responsibilities.
Keep going.
And we'll add that, we'll provide this in an email format later in digital form that we can circulate to
Keep
everyone.
going, it'll
because
give you the
there's
next
several lists.
topic. There you go. Roles and responsibilities.
Okay. Even though we're nonprofits and, you know, we're already making sacrifices as board members and officers, there's still a level of duty and responsibility and accountability for all of us. And the first topic is something maybe we might want to ignore if we could, but particularly the more money that's involved, there's a higher level of responsibility and accountability. And so there are legal duties of board members. And we've got to go back.
One more. Go back.
Okay. Yes. First is, according to nonprofit corporation law, a board member must meet certain standards of conduct and attention to his or her responsibilities to the organization. These are referred to as a duty of obedience, duty of care, and duty of loyalty. First, we'll go to a duty of care. You can keep it there. Means using your best judgment. It doesn't mean you have to be perfect or that you cannot make a mistake. It's just that you have exercised reasonable caution in making decisions. Duty of loyalty means putting your personal and professional interest aside for the good of the organization. Having a conflict of interest policy in place would be one way to exercise a duty of loyalty. Duty of obedience means being true to the organization's mission. A donor has a right to expect that funds given will be used for that stated purpose. It is also important that the board ensure that the organization is following all laws and regulations that may apply to nonprofits, such as payment of any taxes and public disclosure of information. Okay, the next slide. Fiduciary duty is a more common term that more of you are probably aware of. It requires board members to stay objective, unselfish, responsible, honest, trustworthy, and efficient. Board members, as stewards of public trust, must always act for the good of the organization rather than for the benefit of themselves. They need to exercise reasonable care in all decision making without placing the organization under unnecessary risk. Specific questions board members should ask. This is fine. Is our financial plan consistent with our strategic plan? Is our cash flow projected to be adequate? Do we have sufficient reserves? Are any specific expense areas rising faster than their sources of income? Are we regularly comparing our financial activity with what we have budgeted? Are our expenses appropriate? Do we have the appropriate checks and balances to prevent errors, fraud, and abuse? Are we meeting guidelines and requirements set by our funders? Okay, next slide. Okay, and NMHOA for the past few years the board members have entered into expectation agreements to pledge that duty of loyalty and care. And our general topics in the board expectations agreement are standards for NMHOA participation. Myra addressed that as far as attending board calls and meetings. What I expect from the board, what the board expects from me, participation in committees, participation in fundraising activities. And this last one could be a real challenge because I know I'm heavily involved with my state group and lower groups within my state, and they all have their pressures for fundraising, but all of these groups need funds, and there is that responsibility of board members to help the financial stability of all these boards. Okay, next. All right, board roles. First is establish a strategic direction, develop and maintain focus on mission, establish vision of what the organization intends to be like at some point in the future, say between 3 and 5 years down the road, approve strategic goals, articulate the values or principles by which the organization will operate, Ensure resources. Keep on that. On an ongoing basis, identify the resources needed. Financial resources, chief staff officer, information and knowledge, an effective board, visibility, support, and credibility in the community. Establish policies for how these resources will be acquired. Determine how board members will participate in resource development, especially in fundraising. Provide oversight and accountability. First is program, monitoring. Are we doing what we plan to do in a timely manner? Evaluating, are our programs effective in serving our mission? Finances, establish budget guidelines. Oversee financial management to ensure that necessary financial policies are in place on a regular basis. Review financial statements, understand what they say, and ask questions when things are not clear. Arrange for an audit and review audit report. Legal and ethical operations. Ensure compliance with legal requirements, including organization's bylaws. Safeguard the organization's values and philosophy. Avoid conflicts of interest. Hold everyone associated with the organization accountable. The CEO, who in turn must hold the staff accountable, the board itself, and each individual member of the organization. Okay. We've got a list of 10 basic board responsibilities. I don't have it on PowerPoint, but we'll send that out. I will just highlight those. One is determine mission and purpose, select a chief executive, support and evaluate the chief executive, ensure effective planning, monitor and strengthen programs and services, ensure adequate financial resources, protect assets and provide proper financial oversight, build a competent board, ensure legal and ethical integrity, and finally, enhance the organization's public standing. Okay, that concludes mine, and we'll move on to providing oversight, and we'll start with Myra.
So, probably. Okay,
I don't think it's on.
Yes, it is.
it was working.
There we go.
Okay.
Yeah.
What, I'm going to throw a question out here. What does the word fiduciary mean? Can someone tell me?
Responsibility of finances.
Huh?
Responsibility of finance.
Okay,
Okay, I already covered that part,
all right.
so I would move on since we're short of time.
Okay. Well, I'm sorry that I apologize. This is the stuff that you wanted me to cover.
Yeah, but that was transferred to the other section.
Okay. If it looks like we don't know what we're doing, we really do. It's just that we've had our time cut down. We thought we had an hour and 90 minutes, and we only had an hour and 15 minutes. Sorry, I'm totally at loss. I have no idea where to go next.
Well,
Give me some guidance here.
okay. Checklist of key items.
Where's that at?
That's insane.
I'm in the right section.
Okay.
Section 7. Right here. Okay. Checklist of key financial questions?
Okay.
Is that where you want me to start?
Yeah, wherever you want, or you
Okay. All right. We have a checklist here of key financial questions board members should ask. Have we had a run? Have we run a gain or loss in our financial statements? Are we having a gain at the end of the month, or a gain at the end of the year, or a loss? our key sources of income raising are falling? Is our membership falling? If that's one of our key sources of income, is it falling? And if it is, why? If it's gaining, that's wonderful, but find out why so you can keep on that track. Do we have a diversity of funding sources? That's very difficult to come up with a diversity of different funding sources. What are our key expenses, especially salaries and benefits? Are they under control? Those of you who do not have staff members, what are your key expenses? And when you sit down at the end of the year and discuss your budget for the following year, usually you'll start out with the expenses. What are you going to plan? What are you going to try to accomplish this next year, and what's going to cost? Then you come back to, well, how are we going to come up with the income then to cover those costs? And if indeed we can't come up with the income, then we have to cut out some of the programs or whatever that we're trying to get accomplished for that year. Do we have sufficient reserves? I find that kind of funny. Being in the profit world, I never really saw sufficient reserves there either. But it would be nice if you could go ahead and have money set aside so that now with us, our checking account cannot drop below $10,000, and our payroll cannot drop below that either. So we must have $20,000 minimum on hand at all times. If you can, sit down and predict your cash flow, because depending upon when your membership is up is renewable every year. If you have your membership renew every January, you're going to have an influx of cash in January. But what are you going to do in March, or what are you going to do in June? You're going to have new members coming on, but they're not going to create a influx of cash at the time. Are we comparing our actual figures to our budget? Now, you don't have to do that on a monthly basis, but you could do it on a quarterly basis or every 6 months. But somehow, somewhere in there, you need to be able to start comparing your budget with your actual expenses so you can see how close you are. When you charge, if you have an executive director and you charge him or her with you want them to raise an extra $90,000 that year, when you have your budget meetings every quarter, then you can see just how close that person is in obtaining that extra $90,000. Are we filling all needs to reporting documents on a timely basis? That is one area, to be very honest with you, that I have a problem with, getting things on a timely basis. And I'm working on that because I understand just how important it is. And so getting these reports in on a timely basis helps your board move forward. Are we fulfilling all of our legal obligations, even if you're not a 990, a 501c3, where you would have to file a 990N or a 990EZ? There isn't anybody in here large enough to file a 990. And even if you are just a state nonprofit, you still have to file, unless you have to go back in and look at your state returns and what they require, even if you are a nonprofit on a state level. In the state of Utah, you still have to file an 1120H, and then you file the appropriate state return. And if you don't make a profit, the state of Utah really doesn't care. They still want $100 minimum every year. So if you're a state association or an HOA in the state of Utah, you pay $100 minimum every year. whether you're, no matter how much of a loss that you have. Is there any, what else do you want me to cover?
Well, we have about 5 more minutes for this section.
Okay.
So whether Carla,
Do you have, can I open it up for questions, or should we turn it over to someone else with more? More time.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mine is regarding bylaws. And that's something that we're in the process of reviewing and changing. And a lot of it's based on the training we received in May. So I would just suggest if you haven't been able to go to this type of training by NeighborWorks, you can apply for scholarships with them. And they're really receptive because they want HOAs to be operating at peak efficiency. Okay, so bylaws, the way I view bylaws is, this is like the bread and butter. You know, it's not all the details in your policies and procedures, but your bylaws give an overview of how you're operating. Basically, you're putting in like how many meetings you're going to have. If you're going to meet once a month, if you're going to meet whatever, you can put that in there. You can put anything about basic operation. And then once you develop your bylaws, you can go back in policies and procedures and put in all the detail about how you're going to do these things. If you're operating differently than what your bylaws require, you need to change your bylaws because everything should be updated at least every 3 years, or at least looked at, to make sure that you're still operating the way your bylaws require. Because if IRS comes in and does an audit and you're not doing that, they're going to ask, why are you operating differently than what your bylaws declare? And so it's really imperative that your bylaws stay current as possible so that you can actually know that this is the way we're operating. So if you change your operations, change your bylaws. It doesn't have to be right that minute, but at least if you know you're operating differently, even if it's not the 3rd year, whatever, go ahead and make a review of them and make changes. The bylaws are not static, and the board should review them regularly. They should accurately reflect how you're operating and remain relevant. This requires amending the bylaws periodically. Some organizations appoint a committee to review the bylaws and make suggestions. If the board votes to amend the bylaws, you must mark those revisions on the bylaws and record the date that they were amended and what was the topic that was amended. If you don't have dates of where you make those changes, people are not going to remember. I can tell you, my old local coach said, if you don't write it down, you're not going to remember it after you leave this room. And 5 minutes after you leave, you're going to forget. Because you're not going to keep that in your head. The other thing is, there's a hierarchy to bylaws. The bylaws are detailed and immediate source of regulations. They must follow federal and state laws and comply with your organization's articles of incorporation. So that's one thing you need to make sure, that your bylaws are in line with your articles of incorporation. If there's a contradiction between the bylaws and these other regs, then that part of the bylaws is invalid. And in order for the bylaws not to contain too much detail, the board should also create comprehensive policies. They'd say policies and resolutions, policies, resolutions, policy, procedures. Either one works. If the bylaws are ignored or broken, there may be several reasons why an organization does not follow the bylaws, and there are different ways to address it. In some situations, bylaws are ignored because they are no longer relevant to your organization, and either they are too broad and have not been revised for several years, or are not in a language that is either practical or understandable. If this is true, the board should make revisions a priority. Both board members and others involved with the organization can be concerned when bylaws are intentionally broken and are not amended. There are a few avenues of recourse. And we covered some of it, but internally, if you're a board member, bring up your concerns regarding the bylaws with the chair and other board members. Make sure that your objections are noted in the minutes so that there's a record of it. Bylaws are a legal document similar to a contract. There can be legal repercussions if they are ignored. And therefore, it is important for the board to take concerns seriously. If you are not on the board, try to contact one of the board members or the executive director if you have one. If the board holds public meetings, address your concerns there. So most of us are on a board or participating in a board. You need to bring up any concerns you have about the bylaws at a regular board meeting and bring it so it's on the record.
Okay, let's go on to a board meeting.
Okay.
That section.
Board meeting. Yay. Okay, if you could go to the board meetings. There we go. Next slide.
Change the slides.
She did,
Is there anything there
Your name.
after that slide?
No, just establishing.
Oh, that's the next, okay, so I didn't put this part in there, that's okay. You're gonna receive in your pack, whenever we send this out, you're gonna receive a copy of this. There is, for nonprofit governance, the boards cannot and should not grow stagnant. As the environment in which they operate constantly changes, boards must learn to adapt to new and different circumstances. In general, nonprofit boards are experiencing the following transitions. I'm not going to go through all of them. There are 15, there are 20 on front and back. But this will just give you an idea. Recruiting new board members based on personal relationships with existing members or strong emotional commitment to the cause. And that's from that point to recruiting selectively based on future board members' skills, influence, as they relate to the organization's strategic focus. Another one would be from holding meetings as only the avenue for decision-making, or changing it to employing varied means of communications and maximizing use of technology. Facebook, you could put a notice out there. If your board has a Facebook page, you should use it. And let's see, then there is a monthly based to focus on key strategic issues, going from that portion to organizing effective committee structures and recommend policy to the board. Because the goal here is to have more people involved rather than less. And I can guarantee you, if you send out a note or an email to your members and ask if you know you need certain skill sets, like you need an accountant or you need somebody good at reading contracts, whatever, you can put a notice out to your members and say, we need people who are skilled in this area. An attorney, if you don't have an attorney and you know somebody in your membership that is, ask them if they're willing to do work for you pro bono. As a member, they may be willing to do that. That's just a couple of examples. In the Empowered, I think it was June, I put an article in there regarding board meetings, and I would venture to guess everybody in this room has thought to yourself, would this meeting ever end? How much, I mean, probably saying it now, okay? But the issue is, when we have that in our head, we're not listening to what's going on. And the longer we sit and listen, everybody kind of, okay, can we just move on? Can we, To improve the meeting productivity, if we make our agendas more concise and we choose things like, if we have certain things, how many of you use a consent agenda for your board meeting? Do you even know what that is? Okay. A consent agenda is where you take items that are regularly reviewed, like your financial statements, your whatever you look at on a regular basis on your board, stuff that's consistently analyzed by the board. Like when you send out the minutes from the prior meeting, you all review them, if you have comments, changes, you make them and send them back to the secretary or whoever took the minutes. Okay? Those kinds of things are regular monthly reporting. You can put in one item on your agenda that says consent agenda. And you can ask everybody, if you have read these documents, if you have reviewed them, are you in favor of just approving them? That way you don't spend umpteen hours trying to go through stuff that they should have read in their email, okay? Take whatever you sent them in an email and put it in one thing on your agenda, it says consent agenda. And when the president comes on and starts the meeting, the first thing he should ask is, has everybody reviewed the consent agenda documents? If everybody has reviewed them and you don't have an issue with them, everybody say, I approve, okay? And if you're in the same room, it's easier than if you're on the phone. But a consent agenda is a fairly new thing, and a lot of HOAs don't use it. We use it regularly because it saves a whole bunch of time. The other thing is, if you set time limits for each agenda item, if you know that there's going to be a lot of discussion, put that in your agenda. If it's going to take 20 minutes for you guys to hash it out, put 20 minutes. If you don't spend that time, great, you got extra time for something else. If you evaluate the items on the agenda, is that item in line with where we're going as a board? Is that something we need to address offline? Should it be addressed as a board on that agenda? It's really helpful if you look at each item individually. If you've got committees and they're providing reports, those reports should be part of your consent agenda as long as they're being sent to you ahead of time. If you don't get committee reports ahead of time before the board meeting, you should review them as a part of your agenda. Okay. Now, if you, let's see here. Let me go to my next. Okay, yeah. The one thing that we insist on our board is that the people come to the meeting prepared, having read or reviewed all the documents that were sent out prior to the meeting. If you send your agenda out a week ahead of time or 2 weeks ahead of time, however long you think it's going to take them to review that information, send it out early. And that way they have time to review it. And if you don't take the time to review it, don't make excuses to say, I haven't had time to review it. And if you don't review it, you're not going to be able to vote on the consent agenda. So it's just, there are ways to make it easier and faster to get through your agenda. I'm just going to read this real quick. It's from the NeighborWorks training. It actually explains what a consent agenda is, not necessarily what I said, which it's in here. Anyway, a consent agenda is a component of a meeting agenda that enables the board to group routine items and resolutions under one umbrella. As the name implies, there is a general agreement on the procedure. Issues, items in this consent package do not need any discussion before a vote, unless a board member requests a removal of a certain item ahead of time. The entire package is voted on at once without any additional explanation or discussion. Because no questions or comments are allowed on the consent agenda, this procedure saves time. Note, it would be wise to go through a sample run of a consent agenda. Take one meeting and just try it and see how it works. Letting the board know that if they have questions regarding an item in the consent agenda package, they need to request that item be removed and placed on the agenda as an item for discussion. Otherwise, it all goes in as one. But that's why it's important for you to review it. So you can pick out things that you have concerns about, you want to change something or do something with that discussion further, remove it from the consent agenda, but it has to be done before that board meeting. So this guy can put it on there as a separate item.
Okay,
Thanks.
great. Thank you. Next topic is establishing strategic direction. And I want to ask the group, how many of your organizations hold dedicated meetings to discuss strategy or goals for the organization, or retreats? Any of you? Okay. Okay. Yeah. We do. In fact, a year ago, our board was in Minneapolis and held a retreat to discuss several concerns, but also strategic planning. And first, let's go to the next slide. What is strategic planning? Strategic planning is a systematic process through which an organization agrees on and builds commitment among key stakeholders to priorities which are essential to its mission and responsive to the operating environment. Strategic means choosing how to respond to an ever-changing environment. Systematic, using a focused and productive. Priorities, making decisions about ends and means for the short and the long terms. Commitment, engaging key stakeholders in building a consensus. Okay, next. What are the benefits of planning? As you can see, an opportunity to engage in serious examination of and reflection on the meaning of an organization's success and effectiveness. A chance to build higher levels of understanding and commitment to the work of the organization among staff and the board. A constructive moment to engage in internal evaluation and to learn about the external environment. Improved decision making. The enhanced organizational confidence that comes from managing by intention and design rather than by emergency. Okay, next slide. Okay, success factors. Commitment from the board's leaders and from senior staff. A realistic plan for planning. A timetable that allows for adequate information gathering, reflection, and discussion, but does not drag the process out beyond the attention span of board and staff. A reasonable commitment of human and financial resources given the other demands on people's time and the organization's budget. Next slide. Potential obstacles. Board members who are jaded or cynical about planning. A staff leader with a very strong and personal vision. An organization facing a crisis. Next slide.
Can we go back to the other slide? I have a question.
Okay.
So it says board members who are jaded or cynical about planning. You know, we haven't really talked about board members that really shouldn't be on the board. How do you remove people from boards that are an obstacle for moving that organization forward?
There's a section on that in here that we didn't get to. Could you make a note of that, Carla? That it will include that section of this training booklet in what we send out.
Okay. And my other question is because this is above really probably what most groups are doing on the ground, but the relationship between the board and the paid staff person, I think, is something that isn't usually covered in this type of presentation, but I'm wondering if it's within what NapeWorks is covered, I think.
Yes.
It is in there?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
We could include, if we make a note of that too, the relationship and who does what, you know, to reach that understanding. Okay, strategic planning process. Who are we? Create or affirm an organizational vision and mission. Where are we now? Access constraints, opportunities, resources, and the environment. Factors that will affect the organization and influence planning. Okay. Analyze the current plan, if one exists, and the program, financial, and administrative performance of the organization. We've got other topics. Where do we go? Where will we get there? And how are we doing? So we're always analyzing and evaluating. Next. Key questions to answer. Mission statement. That answers why do we exist? Why are we committed to support that existence? The vision answers where we want to go or be. Shared vision. Each person sees his or her own picture of the organization at its best, as well as shares responsibility for the whole organization, not just for one piece of it. Goals. That answers what we need to do to get where we want to go, to close the gap between current reality and our vision. Core values answers how we will treat each other and our constituents. And we have a handout, or we'll have an attachment that answers 20 questions for strategic planning. Next slide. One is called the SWOT analysis. Anyone heard of the SWOT analysis? S-W-O-T, not S-W-A-T. It's just SWOT, someone. But that stands for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And you have internal forces and external forces. So the internal forces are internal competencies, financial, managerial, functional, and organizational capabilities, reputation, and history. And we've got a chart where people could go through that and identify the strengths and weaknesses of those internal forces. And with external forces, you have opportunities and threats. So that would be the external conditions and trends, economic, technical, political, and legal, social, and community. Next slide. Contents of a strategic plan. It breaks it down into philosophical, strategic, and tactical. Next slide. Philosophical is broken down further into vision and mission. Next. Strategic is broken down to goals, and we'll have this in the packet. Tactical, broken down into objectives. Some of you might have heard about the SMART approach, focusing on objectives. Specific, 1 minute, okay. Specific, measurable, attainable, results-oriented, and time-determined. And then action steps. And I will conclude that. Did you have anything on assessments and evaluation?
Yeah, we don't have time.
Okay. Those that we didn't get to will include in a digital form that can be emailed to the group. Thank you for your patience, and hopefully you gathered something of value out of some portions of the presentation.
This was a 4-day course, 6 hours a day. And we did it in
You had 2 sessions.
Huh?
You had the grant writing.
But I'm talking about just this section here. So, and
We would, if during a break, if you have specific challenges that you're dealing with on your board, like Tara was asking about, please let us know. And if we have any information in here we can share with you, we will.
So it's a 15-minute break then, and we'll start back at 11:30.